So we use code switching in a negative and a positive sense.
Yeah, we have.
We just switched it. Right. We initially talked about how it was negative. We're redefining words even as we go.
Awesome. Yep.
So what it was initially was you're code switching because there's competing narratives out there that you feel like you're being drawn towards multiple narratives simultaneously.
Yeah.
And you have to code switch. You have to change the way not only you operate, but the way you communicate and the way you live to fit those different codes depending on which part of the world or which part of the city or which member of your family or friend group you are interacting with.
That's right.
Now you're saying, well, Christians see this as a massive advantage because, but it's only an advantage, I think, if you're, I wouldn't say certain, but if your hope is placed in Christ. Kia ora koutou, welcome to Lunch on the Way. I'm Joey, joined by Jonathan and Graham, and we are off-site in a playland.
Right. This is awesome.
It was hard to not stop Joey from playing with the toys, but pulled him in, haven't we?
Yeah, we're in the rainbow room.
Yeah. We're in the rainbow room.
Jonathan's playing with a little Aussie on the thing.
That's awesome.
So we're kicked out of our normal office space because we're in the middle of a move, and in about 2 weeks we'll be in a new building. But until then, Graham sourced us a space at the church he attends, which is awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's a really lovely building. So we're in central Auckland, and I don't know if the camera can see it there, but we're basically beautiful window looking out, and we're in the middle of CBD in Auckland.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and
it's beautiful.
Yeah, and we might do this one more time. Yeah. And then we'll be back in a more permanent location. Mm-hmm. But
tell us what you think.
Yes, tell us what you think. I kind of love how it looks. It looks like a party was happening. Balloons have been up there forever. Anyway.
Yeah.
Graham, how was your week?
Oh, good, yeah. I mean, we're moving at college, so a bit of that's been at college, cleaning up, moving bits and pieces around, and packing boxes, and then other stuff, just normal stuff as the end of the year, planning for next year. Did a breakfast this morning.
Yeah.
So that was a very early start. That was great. Talked about preaching. And the mental health of preaching, that's just a whole interesting subject.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
You're always thinking that preachers have got it all together?
Well, apparently not. We all know that if we preach, we know that. But that's a whole subject in itself. But it was interesting. So interesting in the sense of that we can appear that. And Reuben Munn, who facilitated that discussion, is probably one of the better preachers around, actually.
Amazing.
He's very good.
Wow.
But he talked a little bit about his own journey in the stuff and, a bit of self-doubt and things like that. And that always surprises you if somebody's so competent.
Right. That's so true.
How about yourself, Jonathan?
Yeah. What have I been doing?
What's this week look like?
As I was saying before, I've been editing a book on The Witcher and theology and religion, which is interesting. So I've been deep in The Witcher, or reading about The Witcher and people's experience of it, and thinking theologically about it.
You never watched the...
I've never seen the show.
No, but you're editing it for someone.
Yeah.
Do you have any desire to see the show now?
Yeah, I don't think I do, but that's okay.
After you hear what it's about.
Yeah, I think I've been deep enough. Yeah. So that's been my week.
Oh, man.
How about you, Joey? What's happening?
My little girl turned 1
on
Saturday.
Yeah,
significant
or on
moment.
You should have brought her in.
Yeah.
She'd been happy in here.
No, Lauren just sent me through some photos, and they're at a play group, and she's full of paint. And Lauren said I didn't bring a towel.
Oh, no.
I'm like, oh, no.
Nappies, mate. That's it. Just wipe it down with nappies.
Yeah, well, I know. But we had a party, and it was low-key, but it was fun.
Cool.
Way too much food. That's how it always is.
That's right.
And she was a bumblebee.
The whole sugar thing.
Yeah, oh, man. And we didn't have like proper sugar, like processed sugar. But there were fondant bees on a cake that we put close to her, and all of a sudden one was gone. And we looked around, and we're like,
"That's awesome!
What just happened?" And then we look in her mouth, and then you can see like the remnants of it, and it just dissolved instantly. We're like, "All right, there's your first hit of sugar."
Yeah, she's discovered it. She'll be out for more bees.
That's it, mate.
Yeah.
It's over.
It's over. But that was fun. It's crazy to have a 1-year-old, and then it's just gonna get crazier from there.
That has gone so fast, eh?
Yeah. That's
cool, man. It's cool.
So today we've got a few things we could talk about, but but there was.
We could try and dovetail them all.
We'll try and dovetail them all again. It usually, this is what happens for those who are listening. What usually happens is I at least have some idea of what we're going to talk about, and then all of a sudden, Graham and Jonathan, the second they get into a room before we record anything, start talking about something massively interesting, and I'm just like, why are you talking about it now? Why don't
that's what we do.
Why don't you just save it for the microphones?
Oh yeah, that's true.
So it was about language, pivoting within language for millennials. I thought it was fascinating, and then you changed it to technology.
It started with technology.
Okay, so what did you recap? What you started talking about?
Well, just saying,
it started with the technology.
A friend of ours has a colleague in Australia who made the comment that technology is neutral. It has.
No, that's the second conversation.
Oh, was the second conversation? What was the first one?
The first conversation that we had was talking about The Witcher and people gaming, and how millennials love gaming and they love being in games and doing all that. Kind of
that's
stuff.
right. The imagination we talked about.
That's right. And you were saying that it's part of where they contact kind of the transcendence and kind of the spiritual world. And then I said, I think millennials are code switchers.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
code switchers.
I
never heard that one before.
And taking it from linguistics, where people who can speak multiple languages, they call that they're able to code switch. And what they're actually able to do is to talk in different worlds, because languages bring with them whole new worlds. So they can speak English, and that brings a whole world. They can speak Chinese, that brings a whole history and a whole world to them. Yeah. And they often, for example, people who speak Chinese, they may speak that at home with their parents and then go out and speak English to the university friends. Yeah. And both of those are quite different worlds. And so they're code switching the whole time. And I said, well, I think millennials are code switchers in the sense that they live in a secular world, and then they go to gaming to get their spiritual experience. And so, and then I made the comment, and this is a huge comment. Then I made the comment, I'm like, I don't think they have a coherent worldview.
That's
because if you said, okay, give me a coherent worldview, what is the world? It's so code switched up. It's so bitsy for them that they don't know where they really stand, and there's an opportunity and a challenge.
Yeah.
So that's the first conversation.
Yeah, the first one.
Can we stick with that one?
We can stick with it, but then, we can jump around.
So what you're saying, because I loved playing video games growing up.
Okay.
I loved playing this game that was massively compelling. This is the word that you use now instead of saying addicting. You say compelling.
That's awesome.
Because it doesn't have such negative connotations with it.
Compelling,
and
okay.
Compelling.
That's interesting.
I'll tell that to my Linda. You playing a game that's compelling.
Yeah, that's right.
It's very compelling. It was called World of Warcraft.
Oh man,
have you heard of that one before?
Yeah,
vaguely.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that one. It's a world, man. You step into that game and you literally step into a whole new world that just doesn't end, because there's always new patches that get installed and new bosses to beat. And even though you max up the levels, they're still armored, and it was insanely fun. And it was like an escape, but it was also like it was an adventure, and it was a different world which had different rules, but tapped into like the mythological.
Yeah.
And it made me feel like I was playing something on like a different level to what I was living.
Uh-huh.
Is that what you're kind of talking about a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
But hasn't, to some degree, every generation looked for something that actually takes them out of their own narrative? No, so growing up, I didn't... So there was only one screen, the TV screen, or the picture theatre screen. If I took the picture theatre screen when I'm 18 years old, and I see the first Star Wars movie, and it blew me out of my seat. I went home. I was blown away. Yeah. I was like, "Oh, this is a whole new world," and it was so incredible. The cinematography, now it's not great, but the cinematography, the ideas. So that's when I was an 18-year-old. So
that's probably true.
It hasn't, to some extent. And so what a generation before, maybe Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, or probably less so Tolkien, because that was sort of more popularised in the 70s, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, taking all that information, and I think maybe my argument still stands. Okay. And here I'm going to back up my argument. Yeah, it still stands, because we've been moving into a secular world for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I think we've all been looking for those spiritual kind of experiences, and we've found it through, like you say, through novels, through film, through through gaming.
Yeah.
And I think that's the argument still stands that we're still living in a kind of a split kind of world.
Yeah.
That people are still looking for that spiritual experience. Funnily enough, they find it in the arts. Because all of us have just described artistic kind of practices. Yeah. But the world that we have to deal with every day is secularized completely.
Yeah, it's almost devoid of mythological story meaning.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's a world. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing is the world in which. So if you wind the clock back even further, history before you have the proliferation of print.
Yeah.
You would have people telling, yes, in Europe, very Christian story.
Yep.
But across the world in different cultures, you would have storytellers and shamans, and sitting around the campfire telling these tales, these mythical tales.
Absolutely.
So I think it's all this. So there's always this desire for human beings for a sense of transcendence. I think.
Yeah.
That there's a world beyond the world that actually is.
Yeah, and when you say transcendence, you mean that there's meaning. There's greater meaning to their life than what is just in front of them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the secular thing is in our world has flattened that to that sort of the mundane.
And this is a development that's happened probably over 100 years now. Yeah. The secularization.
Well, more than that, because everything's connected back and back and back. But from what some cultural historians say, it was really around the World Wars. World War I began the massive chipping away, and then World War II kind of solidified it as like a desecularization and a looking to a new world. That's also, but even prior to World War II, because of World War I, there was Hitler. Honestly, with Nazi Germany, this whole will to power and the glorification of the state and the state reshaping reality in a sense was possible.
Yep.
I think although and I've listened to ones like Tom Holland on the rest of history.
Yeah.
He talks about the 19th century and these writers writing these sort of flamboyant novels of discovering the sort of riches of Egypt and this sort of myth around that. And he talks about the sort of popularity of that. Yeah. So what you're realizing is that even in the 19th century, the sort of breaking away from the kind of maybe the Christian narrative.
Industrial revolution as well.
What's that?
The Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
That everything was becoming mechanized and stuff. And then you get the occult that's happening all around that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. But the funny thing is, I mean, I think what you just described is the historical development of that. And then underlying that is actually 100 years, 200 years before that is the intellectual kind of move towards the secular, which funnily enough starts happening with Descartes. Yep. And then comes in with Hegel, and then comes in with Nietzsche and stuff like that. So that's all the historical.
You could also
the intellectual world is happening.
You could also go back to the Reformation too.
Oh yeah, you could absolutely.
That's what's exactly going on there.
But you're right, and then they kind of dovetail in the world wars.
Yeah.
And kind of births the world that we live in.
Well, because Charles Taylor makes the argument that there's the philosophical foundation. And that's laid hundreds of years prior to the popular acceptance of these academic institutions.
Yeah,
and it's not to say that secularization equals removing religion and mythology from people's worldview. It's actually a reshaping of it, because I think Charles Taylor makes the argument. He said it's not a subtraction story. It's not secularization increases because of religion is subtracted. What is happening is the idea of the story that we are living in is changing. And so the mythology has changed, but people don't see it as mythology.
Wow, that's great.
They just see it as as reality itself has emerged thanks to the Enlightenment and scientific revolution.
Wow.
That's the argument he's making, where he's saying that people are just as spiritual as ever before.
Absolutely.
It's just that spirituality has been recast in the world.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been the story that we've been living the last, 80 plus years, whereas something different has happened now, where people are more willing to be explicitly searching for a level of mystery in the world.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. Okay, man, everything you said, I love.
Go for it.
I just love that.
You're boiling over here. Tell
us
I
am. I'm also, because I can see how this can dovetail back into our conversation about gaming and about those two worlds. Okay, so So exactly right. I think Taylor's right. It's a new mythology, and secular is in search of religion. So this is where John Milbank comes in with kind of radical orthodoxy. Yeah. So the radical orthodoxy project, which is John Milbank, Catherine Pinstock, others, they say, look, the secular isn't a neutral space, which is what we tend to think of it. It's a space with no religion, so everyone's allowed there. He says, no, the secular is contested space.
Yeah.
And so what we get in the gaming world, and this is kind of comes back to what I was trying to put forward, is that we have the gaming world gives us a spirituality now, but we live in the business world where we go to work every day, which is very secular. That's a contested space. So what the millennials are growing up in is how do we marry the secular world that we're always in with this deep need for the spiritual that we find in the gaming world? Those are in
cinema or in
that's
whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
they're in contestation with each other. They're battling each other, and which one's going to win? I don't know.
Could you say this because and I don't want to take us too far down that way, but just the notion of story and narrative.
Yeah,
really competing narratives.
Yeah.
And I won't express sort of. I was in a conversation with my daughter on Sunday night, and I got a bit passionate about the anti
natalism. No,
what do you call it? Natal.
Yeah, antinatalism.
And I think why I got passionate about it, because what began to, as my daughter was talking about it, was just the sort of the kind of idea that people decide not to have children, that's fine. Yeah. And I was seeing underneath and kind of reacting to this. Hang on a second, where did that come from?
Right.
There's a morality behind that, and I find that really. I don't agree.
Right.
And I think what my own kind of narrative are made in the image of God and human beings are good on the planet and a hopeful story sort of played in that. But what I saw there is you got these competing narratives.
Yeah.
So you're saying that, if I'm hearing you right,
that
like video games are another narrative.
Yeah, that's right.
That actually you can go and play in.
That's right. And then take it another step further. The contest, the space that is contested is your own meaning, because the millennials are contested in them. They don't know who they are.
This is you, Joey.
This is inside.
I'm the only millennial in this room.
Yeah, because I think we've just described the culture.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's inside of us. We don't know who we are. We're contested. We long for the spiritual. Yeah, but we need to. Of course, we don't know if that's really true. So we come back to the secular, and then we're in a fight with ourselves. Who am I?
Yeah.
Where do I fit? Which world should I be living in? Which one's true?
So you're saying, if I'm hearing right, just to clarify this, you're saying, okay, we jump into the video game, which is another narrative, a virtual narrative, and then we sort of jump back into our real world, which actually is the contested space that we don't even know what we are in that space.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And we're living in all these different worlds.
Yeah, and it's not just two. It's not a binary. There's many.
Yeah, there's not
worlds.
two. We're living in all these different worlds, and what we're actually living all these different narratives, and we don't know where we fit. What world we should be living in.
It's a real incoherence here.
Yeah, and you see this again coming back to the language. You see this in people that can speak multiple languages that come from different cultures. They will constantly say
third culture.
Culture. They will constantly say, "I don't know who I am or where I quite fit." And I'm living in between worlds.
And they feel it.
I think we're all living in between worlds.
And I think just to get the feeling out, maybe for someone who's listening, because I feel it. And I'm sure we've all felt it, where you feel like you just feel like there's a dissonance within yourself, and it's really over your inability to fully live out one of the many stories that are competing against each other.
That's a good way to put it.
So if I'm describing it like this, let's say the Christian story versus the secular story. You might not feel like you can fully embrace the secular story because the secular myths that are portrayed out there in culture in different mediums, whether it's TV shows you watch, I think of the very popular one, The Kardashians, is trying to, honestly.
In your household.
No. Hey, no. It's trying to live out the secular myth of the good life.
You're right.
And how they're trying to portray it is, well, next year is always going to be better.
100%.
Next year is my year is a thing they always say on that show.
Right.
And you feel like I can't live that out because not every year is actually better than the next in that kind of prosperity enriched worldview.
Yeah.
But then you got the Christian narrative where you feel like you can't fully live that out because it's almost like you still have a foot in the secular myth as well.
Yeah.
And so I think people all feel that.
Yeah, I do. I agree.
And you're saying that's a normal experience because there's a level of incoherence within the different stories and different worldviews and stories that we're living in.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's right. I think they're competing stories. So the secular space has allowed multiple stories to come to the surface because you go back 500 years, there was probably one story that everyone lived to, but that's no longer the case. No. There's many stories and many paths that you can choose to live in this world. That's what the secular has brought to the surface, and in many kind of ways, that's great.
Yeah.
But on the negative side, we don't know which story to choose.
No. And when you think about it, living in a country, and something I've thought a little bit about. How do you hold people? What's the glue that keeps citizenship and statehood alive?
That's a good question.
So politicians actually think about this stuff.
Yep.
We're really in a mess.
Yep.
Because what you're suggesting is actually there's no coherence to any narrative. So I guess what I'm saying is that the political kind of voice is it's fighting. That's a really contested space because they're trying to dominate with a particular narrative.
But on top of that,
100%.
why what you just described there, the citizen, the state, is one of those narratives, and I would argue it's actually a secular narrative.
Oh yeah,
that's probably true too.
Because that's actually it's always been there, but it really revived itself prior to World War II. Mm-hmm. Empire was a thing for hundreds of years, clearly, but an adherence to a state as opposed to, I think, from what I believe, obviously Europe had nation states, but there was kind of like an overlapping and a folding within the nations, within their culture and their way of society because of religion, because of Christianity.
Yeah, I think there was also an agreement.
Made
to say, okay, we'll live in peace.
Yeah.
We're going to do this together.
And even if we weren't, there's rules that we play by if we don't. Yeah.
Because there's a way for us to all... next year will be better for us if we do this. It's a Kardashian kind of progress kind of narrative that's happening.
Yeah, and I guess to create greater statehood too is that you now have, I mean, in your example of World War II, the Nazis were able to use propaganda to galvanize people into an ideology.
Yep.
And equally, the Allies did the same thing as imposing one. So that doesn't back off after World War II. You've got an increasing level of that. So the person that used to work on the farm, or the person that made furniture in the cabinet shop, that wasn't populating their imagination like it is now.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I think. I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
Is that all comes very close to
us. Now, the funny thing about propaganda is it's a closing down of narratives.
Oh, yeah.
So what propaganda is pushing forward one particular narrative that now everyone has to adhere to.
Hence,
the funny thing about code switching is that it narrows language too. It has to narrow language so you're not allowed to live in different worlds.
Oh, really?
Explain yourself. What do you mean?
Well, you start to use the same rhetoric. It's the same language.
So you have a pan language that crosses them.
That's right. So the person that could speak out of one world and speak into another world, you restrict the language, and therefore you also restrict the world that they can kind of be involved in.
Can you think of any examples? That's where it gets tough.
Yeah, what's a good example? Oh man, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
That's all right.
It will come to me. It will come to me as we sit here.
We'll come back to it.
It'll come to me. That's an interesting one, eh? I had a thought when you were speaking, and it's just slipped my mind.
What's that?
It'll come back to me.
What's that? I just slipped my mind.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. I wish I knew.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really does strike me, and as I think about my own Christian life, and then I've sort of reflected a bit just how much because I've age and because I've read scripture so much over a lifetime.
Right.
These narratives sit in me.
Right.
In my imagination. And so they're taken for granted in one sense, but they're being used to actually buffer or critique some of the narratives that I'm bumping up against. I go,
right.
I wonder, that's right for me, but those that are younger than me, like my kids, and those millennials and
millennials.
I know. It sounds awful. On the millennials. But what I'm saying is that's not quite so there.
Yeah.
So to be able to critique a narrative, you've got to have a.
But
what?
Does
it?
Yeah. You know what? I think you're right. You need to critique it. You need to have another narrative to be able to critique the other narrative. You're right, and that's what Christianity, very superficially offers. Is a different kind of world, a different kind of narrative, different world. Hey, but I'm just also thinking about your comment, Joey, about World War II and the nation states and how Europe kind of came back to a kind of a peace.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, but that's exactly what is being broken apart right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
because of narratives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have, again, because we live in a secular world and we don't have a coherent narrative about what the world is, about who we are, about creation, what it is that all these the contested space starts to become very full. And so I think you're seeing this with the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Yep.
I mean, that is an ideology. Russia have risen up to kind of force their own ideology over Ukraine. So the peace has been broken. And you start to see this in China as well, that China rose up.
Yeah,
now,
and that's the breaking part of the kind of Cold War narrative. That's
exactly.
And again, what follows the Cold War narrative that finishes in the 1990s, the collapsing of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah.
You've got the kind of globalization narrative.
Yep.
The world's going to be a better place.
Yeah.
We're all going to, you're going to make stuff in Malaysia and China and Taiwan and maybe India, and we'll put all the pieces together and we've got our product.
Yep.
That's collapsing.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So we've got what they call a multipolar world.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is a very uncertain world.
Yeah, that's right.
So you could say so there's, I guess, a sort of a sense, this is where the hopelessness thing comes in.
Yeah, I
on
think
a political,
that's right.
geopolitical level,
right.
isn't it? So what is it? Where are we going?
Yeah. I reckon let's just play video games.
Yeah, I know. Well,
I can see why you can, isn't it? You can have your own,
exactly,
narrative, can't you?
Exactly,
you can create your own world.
Because you want to escape it.
You can feel like you're in control.
Yes. So can
100%.
This is the thing. I have so many thoughts.
To build your world.
There's so many thoughts that naturally, I think we all have so many thoughts that are just like going everywhere right now from this thought.
Chapter 1.
So here we go. I'm Canadian. Justin Trudeau has said, what is Canadian identity? Yeah. What does it mean to be a Canadian? That's actually been the goal, the explicit goal of the Liberal government in Canada for the last 8 years is to not redefine, I would argue redefine, but to clarify is what he would say, Canadian identity.
But he's not the only one.
No, exactly. So
all nations are doing this at the moment.
So here's the thing. What his party and he and I guess those people who live within the Southern Ontario belt, which is where most of the population is, would say that Canada is multicultural, that we are a multicultural nation. That's who we are. That's an identity. So I hear this and I say yes, because the Christian self in me wants to say, yes, multiple cultures, that sounds very, to the ends of the earth, Gentile inclusion in the promises of God, not just for the Jewish people. Amazing. But when I think about that on a national level, though, it actually gets really messy. Because what you have is, yes, people of different ethnicities and cultures, which is great, but what that brings along with it is profoundly different stories that shape reality itself. So what I see happening within Canada is Canada doesn't know what Canada is anymore. Mm-hmm. Because of this good value of inclusivity, which I think is ultimately good, but I think it's ultimately best under a Christian worldview of inclusivity because of the one story centered on Jesus. But when it's a free game, pluralistic society and every narrative has equal weight, then no narrative has equal, then nothing matters. And if nothing matters and your story doesn't matter, then who are you?
Right.
So that's what I feel is happening within Canada right now.
So then what you get really is that reaction is there. If there's no one narrative that's greater than the other, then why should my narrative get more voice than yours?
Well, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So then that actually doesn't build it doesn't build nationhood or collectivity. It actually breaks it down.
It doesn't
because you. I mean, actually, could you say then you get racism?
Right.
Well, then you get then people feel alienated because there's always a dominant narrative, and then people feel like that's not me though. And why is that being pushed by people in power?
That's right.
And then you get the pendulum swings the other way. And I would say, like, the emphasis on nationhood, I would say, is really about cooperation. How do I cooperate with those closest to me? Is what nationhood is.
Right. Yeah.
It's this cooperation. Yeah. It's how I live at peace with my neighbor, essentially. And do I need the same story? It's been all right for the last 80 years not having the same story, but I think the holes have been increasing, and more water's kind of escaping, and we're realizing, it's actually really complicated. Religion isn't just a thing that you do privately. It's a thing that's deeply inherent within people, and we're finding that, myself included, as an immigrant into New Zealand who's Christian, and then other people of other religious faiths coming into a secular country. They clearly we bring that with us, and that informs everything that we do. It's not something private within our lives. Hence, different narratives in society. Anyway. Any examples?
I should have been thinking of that. I put it off the burner.
Okay, and here's my second.
No, you go.
Here's my second thought off of what you said a while ago, Graham. The video stopped recording because my SD card was full, but I probably got like the first 20 minutes. That's all good. So I'm obviously caring less about the camera right now. When you said about your daughter talking about antinatalism, and it's just like, oh, well, people don't have to have kids. Like, it's fine. A part of me, because of the secular story that I am living out, or where my foot has stepped in secularism, I feel, well, people should be able to do what they want to do.
Well, that's
freedom of the individual is an inherently secular idea that also has its roots within Christianity, but has then kind of morphed into something different under secularism. And where you say, you know what, if someone doesn't want to have kids, they shouldn't have to have kids. And I'm like, that's true. But at the same time, I'm like, but why don't you want to? And I think that's also...
See, what I also said underneath that was this idea that isn't that good?
Well,
and so I'm going, I have got troubles with the good here.
That's what I was trying to get at.
I don't think the good is... So it's, surely... So here's the narrative. A young couple, and they selflessly decide not to have children for the good of the planet.
Selflessly.
Yeah. And I'm going, really? Really? Is that good?
Yeah.
But there's been a moral judgment as to saying that is actually good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's what I think.
I think you're right. No, I think you're right. I was going to say the same thing, just in a different kind of way. I think we need to differentiate between people that have chosen not to have children, which is illegitimate. I think calling on people. Some people will be
Jesus. Apostle Paul. We got to begin there at least, right?
And the single life, all of that kind of stuff, that's fine. I think we have to differentiate people that antinatalism, where it says it's wrong, it's amoral to have children for the sake of for the sake of the planet. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, but that's a narrative that's a narrative that has another story behind it.
You really have to, you have to really dig underneath this to get at it, because
that's right.
What I found was there wasn't time to nuance that story. And so it came across as actually, I think, a bit blunt, really.
Human beings are symbolic people. So everything that we do, the way that we act, the way that we live, is a symbol of something that is much deeper, of a narrative that is much deeper, that gets then shown to the world through our actions and the way that we speak. So we, this is what we do. We interpret symbols. That's what we're here to do, right? Yeah. So exactly.
So back to your point. Where you're going.
Oh, well, you finished it for me.
Oh, did I?
You did, because actually I was going off on a track that I didn't like, and you got me right back on the path.
That doesn't sound like you, Joey.
No? Okay. So what do you do? So let's get more into the response.
Yeah, because I was thinking in my mind as you were speaking, I was like, man, there is a huge opportunity here.
Yeah, so
because
what's
come with we see this through YouTube. What's come with the contested space, the contested narratives, is a greater opportunity for us to speak about Christianity.
Yeah.
Which we probably didn't have 20 years ago. People were like, why are you bringing religion into the conversation? Now we can bring religion into the conversation because the space has opened up even more for us. You know, people might say, well, why Christianity over another one? You know, over another kind of narrative, and then you have to start really having a conversation.
Yeah.
But so the opportunity is that huge amount of conversation can happen now around transcendence, around spirituality. Huge opportunity.
I guess the language I'm trying to use, but starting to.
Yeah.
That's how I'm putting it. Is using actually why the Christian story. Because it's a better story. it's a good story.
Right.
It's a beautiful story. It's a true story, but it's a better story.
Yeah.
It's a hopeful story against those other ones.
Yeah.
So, well, that's sort of So that's how I'm kind of.
Here's I would say
preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Exactly.
I know that. I am.
Yeah. I would say it's hugely attractive.
Yeah.
People that give up their life for other people.
Yeah.
There's something attractive about people that stand up for justice. Man, there's something attractive about that. So on one hand, it's attractive, and I reckon we should talk about those attractive, those attributes. You know, that we give out life. We're here for justice. Everyone is worth something. People love that. Then the good, right?
Yeah.
This is the good. So then you talk about the good. Well, how do you live that kind of life? And you know, how do you live it? Well, you give money to the poor. You know, you look out for your neighbor. So that's how you live it. And then why would you live that life? Because it's true, and it's shown through your actions that the world has this pattern to it. When everyone is looking out for each other, that the world functions in a much better way. Why does it do that? Because it's built to function that way. Why is it built to function that way? Because someone's made it like that.
Yeah.
To me, that it gives the Christian story gives a coherent picture of what existence is about.
I think that's really helpful, actually. What you just said, I think that's really helpful.
And then I would say anyone who's living in another kind of narrative is to say, is your narrative that coherent?
So,
I mean, if we were to truly live it out in the way that you wanted to, would everyone receive justice? Are people drawn to it for that very reason? And does it make a coherent argument for what existence is, the way that you experience it and the way that you want it to be lived?
Yeah.
Ask yourself that question about your narrative.
I mean, that's an interesting point.
See if it stands up.
The true part is, can you live with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you live with it?
Can it sustain you? Can you live with it?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting response or question.
Yep.
That's a good articulation, actually.
Yeah.
When I was driving here this morning, I was driving on the northern motorway to the CBD of Auckland, and you know, once in a while I'm just going through the motions. You know, you're driving in traffic, and then I was listening to a podcast, but I wasn't really listening, and I was just thinking, and I had this image in my head where you ever watch one of those, and it's a mythological image too, where it's maybe in a video game or in a good movie, where it's like you feel like there's something behind the actions that are at play at the moment, where it's just something like you like blink twice really fast, and it's almost like the gradient has changed a little bit in the world.
A glitch in the matrix.
Yeah. Maybe it's like, I like to think of it like maybe, have you watched Stranger Things? Netflix series?
Not really.
Okay, well, the whole thing was like it's a parallel universe, that there's like an upside down reality that wants to leak into the present, but it's more malevolent than good.
Yep.
That was the right word to use, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm intelligent. But when I think about it, I'm trying to put in what you talked about, Graham, on Wednesday last week at the staff devotion, you know, like the already not yet, where I'm like, what lens is there? And that's the story that I intellectually connect with, and because it's coherent, this is the Christian story around, yes, God's heavenly blessing has broken into the present, but not yet. And I'm like, how does that change how I see the world? Like if I blink twice really fast, you know, should I see it differently? And when I wake up in the morning, do I see it how it shouldn't be? And how do I realign myself to the way I should see it? Because with the way, the understanding of like this already not yet, it's like you can focus on either one. Exactly. I think that's the option that you're given. You can focus on the not yet, and then the world just looks like it does for most people in most places at most times. Kind of good, with a lot of bad actions, a lot of injustice, and glimmers of hope. Or you can look at it with the already, and you can see like God's hand everywhere, and you can see yourself as, like, if you want to use the biblical image of an ambassador or like a citizen of God's kingdom in the not yet, but you are the already through the Spirit. So it's like
that's what
a great picture, man.
Because when I've never thrown those two passages together, but they just seem to be the Isaiah 65 latter part. I won't go into that, but basically it throws the image of symbol of Jerusalem,
right,
which is a huge disappointment, actually.
Yeah,
in
that's
terms
true.
to the context
that's
of that,
so true.
And it flicks it to the New Jerusalem with these various images. The last image is the lion and the lamb, so it talks about all of creation. So that's sort of painted. Wow, it's way out there. But then when you throw it with what Paul does in Romans, and here's a context: a city that they're living in, Rome, is supposed to be the epiphany of human culture.
Yeah.
But 90% of Rome are slaves. So the external kind of situation, Rome it's not a great place to live, actually, if you're not on top.
Mm-hmm.
And then internally, you've got other problems there. But what Paul, I think, does is he kind of goes this, okay, you're living with this picture of the new, the God is breaking in, resurrection. And yet your reality is actually... It's tough.
It's very different.
It's tough outside,
that's right.
and it's tough inside the church. But what I think he does is that in that passage, he's saying, listen, you are new creation. Actually, that work of the tension that's going on at the moment, your struggle, it's a sign that you're the first fruits. The Spirit is actually working in you.
Wow, that's cool.
I think that's like when you throw it against that, you're going, so that's quite helpful.
That's really helpful.
And I think it's interesting at the end because he throws this thing, and I hadn't seen it until I kind of looked at it, and probably needs teasing out more, but I thought two parts that looked interesting. One was the imminent reality of, so what are the qualitative elements you pray? It's all those practices that you might do. That's the imminent element of this new creation playing. But I think what he doesn't leave us there, because in that 28 he says, all things work together for good. That's the transcendent bit. That's the bit of the mystery that we don't see.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting, but it helps us play into the present tension.
Yeah,
I like that, man.
You like that?
That's so good. Yeah, it's so good.
Well, it's funny when you do it, you kind of think more about it, and then a little bit more comes to you. So that's kind of where my reflections on that.
You know what? And then, sorry, just jumping off what you said, that was amazing. I love that so much. And then thinking about Paul and coming back to code switching, like at the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah.
Christians are code switchers.
Oh.
Because we're seeing two worlds at the same time.
Yeah.
And do you know what? Well, maybe our job is to be translators. To be allowing people to translate the new to the old, to translate the old to the new, and allow people to see these two worlds at the same time. Yeah. So you know what I mean? Like I think about preaching. The preaching is the classic code switching moment where you get on stage and you say to an audience that are living in the now, and you tell them about the not yet. That is the biggest translating moment than you can ever do in any kind of moment. You were telling people that we're living in a good, redeemed world, and they're living in a crapped out, broken world. Yeah. And at that moment, you're a code switcher where you're translating between those two worlds. And it's the metasis. It's that shaking between those two worlds that something new emerges.
That's a lovely word, metasis.
Yeah. So the metasis. Yeah, that's right. It's where you jump constantly so fast between two worlds like this. That a new vision appears in between that space. In that space. Yeah. You see what life's
I can't help
like.
think extend
it's the blinking, man.
Yeah.
Blink fast enough and you'll see something.
I can't help think of that word you use,
metastasis,
because you get from that word metastasize. We use that's a medical term and particularly relevant in terms of cancer, because what you're looking at, that when cancer growth, when it metastasizes, you're in real trouble.
Right.
So I was just not that's a great analogy for that, but what this what you've just used. What you're wanting is that it metastasizes.
That's right.
And becomes a living,
a new thing.
Yeah, I like that.
New thing.
I like that. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the code swap.
The code switching.
We use code switching in a negative and a positive sense.
Yeah, we have.
We just switched it. Right. We initially talked about how it was negative. We're redefining words even as we go.
Awesome. That's what you got to do when you see a new world.
It was initially
you can't talk about it in old language.
Yeah. You can't. No, you
got to be the poet.
Yeah.
You got to.
So what we saw as a negative, you just spun as a blessing.
Yeah.
So what it was initially was you're code switching because there's competing narratives out there that you feel like you're being drawn towards multiple narratives simultaneously.
Yeah.
And you have to code switch. You have to change the way not only you operate, but the way you communicate and the way you live to fit those different codes depending on which part of the world or which part of the city or which member of your family or friend group you are interacting with.
That's right.
Now you're saying, well, Christians see this as a massive advantage because...
Yeah.
But it's only an advantage, I think, just through processing it right now. It's only an advantage if you're, I wouldn't say certain, but if your hope is placed in Christ.
Yeah.
Because if your hope is placed in Him and the resurrection and the coherence of the story that He presents through Scripture, then you can code swap and not feel drawn to sense the coherence or the pull somewhere else.
Yeah.
Where you can go into different worlds and different ways of seeing the world with integrity because you know the story that you belong to.
Yep.
Whereas what you described in the initial code swapping was the average person who's probably younger than me and slightly older than me, I would say much older, they feel the competingness, the competition of narratives, and they're living incoherently philosophically.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a sense of dissonance within their life because of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would you say that's true?
I would say I think that's what we were talking about, yeah.
All right, good.
But
that's a good way.
Even
you were so good at it.
even naming that, for people is that's probably a pretty big deal because
it's super helpful
because we're not thinking at that level.
No, that's right.
We're reacting to hear and we're not even saying we're living in stories. Because as soon as you start saying that, you go, "Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what story am I living in? And how many stories am I jumping into?
Yeah.
And which story is the most dominant one for me? Which one's regulating that?
That's a good point. Which story is the most dominant one for me? That's a good question to ask.
And it might change in the season that you're in.
And it might.
Yeah.
Whether you might not even recognize it's changed.
Yeah.
Actually, you likely will not recognize it's changed until you're already entrenched in it.
See, when Paul says that scripture, we often take out of context.
Mm-hmm.
The Romans 8:28, all things work together for those that are called.
Right.
That actually is a narrative, because why would you say that? How could you believe that unless there's something far, far deeper underneath the cosmos? That's actually, because it's speaking about sovereignty.
Right, man.
Isn't it?
That's a good point.
It's really deep. It's really, really deep. I've never seen that text and seen that kind of as transcendent over against the one that comes before, which maybe I'm pushing it too far, of being a transcendent expression of kind of us, praying, the Spirit's praying with you. I mean, that's action. We're doing that.
Yeah.
We're kind of in participation. But there is another level here, at a far deeper level, that all cosmos is actually working
towards the good,
Man. which is a pretty comforting thought.
It is.
And I know Christians use that because we quote that text.
Yeah, and we put it towards the individual, like God's working out my story for the good.
Which is true too. But there's a greater cosmic kind of a cosmos in the biblical sense, not in the kind of
which
New
is
Age sense.
I guess that's where I start to think particularly in terms of the existential kind of narrative that's playing at the moment of the planet.
Yeah, of things are going to go
concerns
down.
me, but I'm not. And I make moves. Maybe I should make more moves, but I'm not perplexed by that. We're out of control unless we do something about it.
Right.
But that's the posture that I hear coming.
Yeah, that's right.
In the TV news.
Yep.
Like, we're really in trouble unless we do something about it, because there isn't that underneath it.
Yes.
Can I?
Yes, because it's contested space.
So on top of that, Graham, I listened to a quick clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson. It was just a YouTube short or something, and someone said, well, why did we go to the moon? What a waste of money. And he said, no, it's not a waste of money, because what happened when we discovered the moon and we landed on the moon was we saw the Earth.
Yeah, well, that's...
Right.
And so, yes, that sounds... I was going to spin it in a second. He said, we found the Earth, and we realized, oh my goodness, look how small we are in contrast to the universe. In contrast to just the galaxy or the solar system. We're so small, it's a little marble somewhere in the universe. We got to take care of this place. And he said climate action started literally the next year. Massive reforms for climate action happened in the early 70s. And on the surface, I'm like, oh, that was good. But actually the story that he then interpreted that picture of the Earth from the moon was a story where we are actually just a happy accident.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And because we're a happy accident, it's our responsibility to protect what's going on. And because if we don't, it could all just go to crap. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually the narrative that's behind more of the climate emergency stuff. Mm. And it doesn't allow for a biblical narrative of, yes, care for the earth, care for the world that God has entrusted us with, but God is still the one on the throne.
Right.
And he is actually redeeming more than just this earth, but the cosmos. And actually the earth is not a significant marble in the universe. And you are not insignificant creature that's only propped up with a frontal cortex 10,000 years ago or something, right, or 50,000 years ago, however long it was. There's more to you than that. You actually have cosmic significance.
Mm-hmm. You see, I even think this. I mean, it's really only, I think, probably 1950, if I'm remembering some of my research, that we actually got a picture of a world. So the picture world of the world.
Right,
we could never imagine seeing the world of what we live in.
It's been less than 100 years since we've seen the world.
Yeah.
So here's a kind of idea.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So it's a human endeavor that actually put us on the moon. Mm-hmm. But if you roll back history and the decisions that have been made in the science, who's at work there?
Yeah.
It's not God.
Right.
Could it be that God, the creator of the universe, actually allows humankind to discover through science, through technology, and the use of technology, in terms of our own, I don't want to use the word evolution, but in development and growth and formation, is that actually God allows this to happen so we can care for the planet like we should care for it, because we weren't.
It's a good way. That's a good.
I mean, there's a good perspective. There's another spin on it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're right. Yeah.
So as we kind of can come to the end of this, we're close to an hour.
Yeah.
What's the action?
Thanks for staying with us.
Thanks for staying with us.
We've been all over the place.
Oh, it's been all over the place, but those are my favorite conversations, to be honest.
Yeah, that is the same.
Yeah, I feel like the action point for me is
we don't need an action. We don't need one, but go for it anyway.
Well, I can't. I guess I can't.
This
help
is
but
the
think in
preacher in
those
you.
manner.
This is good, man.
I can't help but
3
think
points.
in those
3 points.
3 points. A and they all start with A. Action. I don't know. I guess it's just to be more reflective around the story and the code swapping and the positives and negatives, and also when I'm critiquing culture, to less critique the action. Well, action's important, but critique the story that's behind the action.
Yeah,
is the important bit.
Right.
And maybe the takeaway here is just actually having some categories of language.
Yeah,
and just as we've talked about story, actually seeing one's life as as a story, but fitting within a lot of stories. Mm-hmm. And what's your story? What's the story that's narrating yours, or you're using as probably not a helpful cue.
Definitely.
Thank you for listening to Lunch on the Way and for your support to this point. If you would like other people to know Lunch on the Way and to listen to these conversations that we have with ourselves and with other people, we would really encourage you to subscribe and review this podcast. That goes a long way. And also, if you want to share on any social media platforms, any episodes that you particularly find helpful for you as you reflect on your own Christian journey and discipleship to Jesus. Thank you for listening to Lunch on the Way.